Here we go. Right. Are you ready? Is it time to start? Right, good evening everybody. Welcome to the Development Committee, 17th of October 2019. As usual, our emergency evacuation announcement. Should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the building via the nearest available exit of the chamber. Our assembly point will be in the public car park at the side of the Civic Suite. Please don't delay your evacuation by collecting belongings. Please don't return into the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please also note that the meeting will be audio recorded, and a reminder to turn your mobiles to off or silent, please. Can I just check that all members of the committee have seen the addendum, 2 sheets that's put in front of you? Yep, seen, had a chance to digest. Thank you. Item 1 then, apologies for absence, have been received in the office from Councillor Weston. We don't have a substitute member. Our non-members attending are Councillor Newport, Steptoe and McPherson. Item 4, minutes of the meeting. Oh, hello. Yes, sorry. Big pardon.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, Craig Cornell can't make it tonight.
Ah, right, okay, thank you. Additional apologies there. No. No. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of August 2019. Are you happy for me to correct that, sign those as a correct and accurate record of that meeting? Thank you. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Members, we've had advice that for item 10.1, all members have a non-pecuniary interest due to the council's strategic housing team having an interest in the site. So do you mind if we just take that one en masse as declaring that interest for all members of the committee? Okay, thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. A little bit of a list. Item 6 as ward and county member for the area. The same with item 7. County member for item 8. Just making sure. And ward and county member for item 10.1, but there you go.
Okay. I'm not entirely sure on the protocol as a visiting member, but just for transparency. Councillor McPherson, did you want to just for?
No, Chairman. I was checking that very fact that we don't have to declare. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, our first item is one that's coming back to us. Item 6, Cherry Orchard Brickworks, Cherry Orchard Lane, Rochford. So Mr. Stranks is taking us on this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to refresh members, the application site you'll hopefully be able to see roughly edged in red there on the plans. Cherry Orchard Lane running down generally north to south, the edges of the Aviation Way and built up parts of Southend. To the north, Stroud Green, the Cock Public House and Hall Road with the Bellway development just off the end there. This application relates to the former Brickfield site that members will recall the kilns and areas were demolished some time ago, and the application came in, has been to committee twice actually, November and June this year. The application is an outline application whereby only the access, which we'll touch on, is up for consideration. So you're dealing with the principle of the development, and then the access, which there are some issues around, and then the remainder of the plan that you're going to see in layout is an indicative plan, just so that the applicant can demonstrate to members that the quantum of development fits the site. To give you some numbers, it's a proposed retirement village. It would have 32 apartments for the over 55s, 22 dwellings for the over 55s, 9 bungalows for the over 55s, 30 number assisted living apartments, 35 sheltered apartments, a 93 bed care home, and 903 square metres of shop space, 397 square metres of A3 restaurant space or CAF, 1,974 square metres of business space, 890 square metres of clinic D1 use type space, and 197 car parking spaces. We'll show you an indicative layout of that in due course. The application, I say, was deferred on the 27th of June to allow officers to consider the revised advice from central government on the provision of elderly care and the outstanding comment from the County Highway Authority, which members will see is expressed in the report that's been updated. If we can jump to this indicative plan, Cherry Orchard Lane, we see here the existing access for the adjoining development to the south. The applicant has coloured up the neighbouring development. You're looking, if you can see the red line, at this area here, which is the Brickfield area. He's included the adjoining airport business park development and shown it in the same kind of line densities and qualities, but you're not considering the entirety of what you can see backgrounded yellow and grey. You're considering this corner up here, and it goes round the terrace of cottages that exist there. It doesn't include those, and you'll see the line goes west of an area of land here that the applicant has demonstrated as having some kind of potential, but that is also outside your site, and just out of interest, it is not included in the permission that was given for this bit. So it's a spare piece of land that the applicant is suggesting could have potential commercial development as well. Just to orientate ourselves, the B1 type uses and the A1 uses are generally described as to probably being held in a building something like this at this part of the site. There is a creche that's been approved as a separate consent, which is on that part, and then the balance of the residential and care uses would be in the middle parts of the site. Hopefully that is clear. I don't know if it's possible to zoom in on that part, give members a bit more detail if that's possible. Yeah, that's good. Can you go another jump? Thank you. If you could, that's great. While we're on this image, it's worth pointing out to members, talked about that for you tonight is to consider access. You'll see that the main roundabout that's already been put in comes into this adjoining site, and you'll see an access through here. This is the only one that the County Highway Authority in the recommendations to you will actually accept. You'll see the applicant proposes an access through here off Cherry Orchard Way, another one to where the nursery school building is, and another one just here. Now, County, they raise no objection to this scheme in highway terms, but it's on the caveat that these western access points would not be used. The only exception they would allow is for the nursery school to enjoy its own little access there and car parking, but that is not in highway view to connect up to give permeability for vehicles. They're happy with cycles and footpath links. That's good planning, but they want the highway movements to come in off the main roundabout, come into this development, go round that roundabout and out through there. It's worth dwelling on that just a moment if members are clear. Were officers recommending approval to you tonight, we would be able to condition that this be the only access if members were to agree. So the fact that we're talking about access and that these, the Highways Authority, don't accept, doesn't stop you from granting planning permission on highway grounds. There is no highway grounds to object to, at least from the Highway Authority, providing this is a condition that would be the sole access. If we could jump to the JAP, please, proposals map. The starting point for any planning application that we have as an authority is the development plan. And Rochford, in addition to our allocations plan that's district-wide, we have the Joint Area Action Plan, the JAP, that has a focus on the airport environment and to do with the expansion of commercial interests and potential for land that's associated with airport uses or business uses and the synergy that goes on with that. This document was subject to public consultation and the usual local plan process. It withstood scrutiny by a government inspector and was adopted by the council in 2014. Now that's a few years ago to some of us, but in local plan and policy terms, this document is reasonably up to date, it's sound, and is fairly young and fresh. It carries substantial weight in decision making in planning. The strategy of the council is to make provision for employment land in the right place near the airport to obviously benefit from that need for businesses to associate with each other and also take the benefits that the airport provides. The site is ideally suited to commercial development, and the council should be cautious at losing it to alternative uses, thus undermining the whole purpose of the plan and the strategy behind it. The applicant has provided views from local commercial agents that support the applicant's position you'll have seen set out in the report before you. They say there is currently no effective demand for built office space, and in their view that supports the applicant's proposal. But members will see that council's planning policy officers, as well as our economic development colleagues, however, draw from the independent review of the need for office space in the South Essex Economic Development Needs Assessment, or the EDNA, which was dated in 2017, which nevertheless identifies a severe undersupply of space relative to demand. So you've got conflicting information there. You've got the documentation evidence base that we rely on saying that we should provide. You've got the advice from consultants for the applicant suggesting that things have moved on and changed, and that this would be excessive. Officers at the moment take the view that because of the age of this plan, it's fairly young, and that commercial developments normally take their time to come along. Unlike residential developments, which have a high profit and therefore a very fast turnaround rate, commercial development has always traditionally taken a long while. If you think of the Royal Lane development, where the Wimpy housing, 200 houses or so, went in quite quick, then along came the school and the sports centre, and then the Asda store came along much later. That's not unusual when you're dealing with commercial developments. It would therefore take very strong circumstances to depart from the development plan. And you'll see that at the beginning of the report, the planning history explains that outline permission has been granted for the commercial use. This site before you tonight also has permission for commercial development that accords with this joint area action plan. Officers therefore consider that as it strongly conflicts with the development plan, the reason for refusal that was before is not set aside and therefore still stands. The second reason for refusal speaks to the sustainability of the development. It's a purpose of the National Planning Policy Framework to advocate sustainable development that is both socially and environmentally sustainable. That means that people will continue to use it, and it's also making best advantage of the resource we have, in this case the land, and the synergy with the existing commercial developments and future commercial developments. The strong residential nature of the development proposed would not sit comfortably alongside adjoining commercial developments. We saw on the other plan, don't jump to it, but there are surrounding other commercial interests, so you would have a residential type use that would be nestled straight alongside future commercial provision, and we consider that that would not be good planning. It would not rest comfortably with that. The revised planning guidance of this year that members asked us to account, because at the time that came out roughly at the same time we did the report, it does seek that councils take into account provision for the elderly and provision for care, but in a planned way. And in the release of, say, your emerging local plan, it asks you to take account of it. Members will know that when you produce your local plan, you rely on an evidence base and documents, and we're saying that the EDNA didn't really strike out that there was an immediate need for provision, way over and above provision of housing more generally. It's right that care is provided, but it doesn't trump the commercial need around the airport environment. That adopted plan there has stronger, carries more weight, and when you weigh it up against government advice, officers are advising you that the provision of the commercial development should take greater weight than the residential provision. Even if Rochford had a specifically identified unmet need, okay, for specialist housing, that would have to be weighed against these other considerations, such as the importance of the airport area, and therefore officers feel that that reason on this case still stands. Members will also see from the report that whilst there is an acknowledged need for some local care provision, the proposal in this case would be dominated by accommodation with care that, if allowed, would, in addition to other developments such as 60 assisted living units granted in Rochway and another 12 at Timber Grove in Rayleigh. In this case, the spread and concentration of the accommodation proposed would be imbalanced and would conflict with your policy H5, which seeks to mix a a better mix of dwellings and that on-site opportunities. So that reason also still stands. In terms of affordable housing, members will see that the applicant does provide the amount that was required, but it would, if approved, be restricted to the over 55s. Now, your colleagues or our colleagues in the housing side have a requirement for generic affordable housing to suit all ages, not a concentration for a certain age group. So this is at odds with that, and officers feel still that reason still stands. Finally, on flood risk, members will see from the report that the applicant has failed to provide sufficient information to pass the sequential test required on flood risk grounds, and that there is not an alternative site in the district at less risk than this one. In fact, the reverse is true. You've got an emerging local plan coming through where a facility like this might be provided in general releases. That would be for a discussion far later. Whereas this site, the flood risk testing that was done, it passed the sequential test because you can't move the airport in simple terms. If you're going to have the airport backed up by commercial interests, the commercial land has got to go alongside the airport provision. So a residential scheme or residential based scheme like is proposed could be sited elsewhere. You've got a big problem if you try to provide commercial uses for the airport if you lose this land, because the airport can't be moved to go and join them wherever you provide them. So that reason for refusal still stands. So the recommendation, Chairman, is refusal for the reasons I've touched on and are set out in pages 6.7 to 6.8 of the officer report.
Thank you. Mr. Dagg. Your usual 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I am not on behalf of the applicant asking you to determine this application this evening. It may surprise you that I am asking you to defer it again. And you would, of course, initially be reluctant to do that, but I'm going to explain why I would suggest it is justified in the particular circumstances of this case to give this matter more careful thought. Mr. Strank said a few minutes ago that there is conflicting information with regard to the position in respect to real commercial property demand for development within this area allocated in the Joint Area Action Plan. He's certainly correct about that, and you can see that on the face of the agenda material. You'll see the reports that have been prepared for the applicant by both Glennie and Ayres and Crooks. In fact, Glennie commenting on Ayres and Crooks. These two firms are at the forefront in property matters, in commercial property matters in this area, and I would suggest that their opinions are to be taken seriously. In addition, we now know that there are concerns on the part of Southend Borough Council with regard to the viability of what is currently allocated on the face of the Joint Area Action Plan. The officers have said in paragraph 314 of the report that you have in front of you that there is no clear and robust evidence to support a departure from the development plan. I would suggest that you're entitled to disagree with that after you've considered what Glennie and Ayres and Crooks have to say. There is an issue there, a very important issue. The officers have also said in paragraph 322 in the report that there aren't any material considerations that justify a departure from the development plan. Well, that depends on the weight that you give to the material that has come forward from Ayres and Crooks and from Glennie. I would suggest that their evidence can't be dismissed out of hand. If that's right, well, then there are some material considerations that justify a departure from the development plan. You don't need to go any further than paragraph 120 of the National Planning Policy Framework to see that what I'm saying is correct. It says planning policies and decisions need to reflect changes in the demand for land. They should be informed by regular reviews of both the land allocated for development in plans and of land availability. And it goes on to say at B, in the interim, prior to updating the plan, applications for alternative uses on the land should be supported where the proposed use would contribute to meeting an unmet need for development in the area. That's where we are in our submissions so far as this site is concerned. We say there is an unmet need in respect of retirement accommodation, and here is an opportunity because the allocations are not being taken up. If you consider this area, no B1 allocation has been taken up. This is a 2014 adopted plan based on information which was gathered in the latter part of the 2000s. In fact, you can see in the footnotes in the plan that much of it was based on material that was gathered in 2009, 2010. And we suggest that this matter ought to be looked at very carefully. Whether it's looked at now or in the future, it's going to have to be looked at fairly soon. Everybody in this room who's taken any interest in this particular area knows that there hasn't been any B1 development on the site, and the plan was adopted in 2014. I appreciate what Mr. Stranks has to say about lead times for commercial development, but this really is something that deserves looking at carefully. Our point is you should look at it carefully. What you should do is to defer now. First, if you haven't already made yourselves familiar with the site, go and look at it. But second, why not convene a round-table meeting where you can question the appropriate experts? All the provision that you need for that is in your code of conduct for good practice for planning matters. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It is your paragraph E. Do contact the Assistant Director, Place and Environment, where you think a formal meeting with applicants, developers or groups of objectors might be helpful. And at the foot of the page, do ask relevant questions for the purposes of clarifying your understanding of the proposals. Now, this is a clear case where the issues involved merit you getting really involved in informing yourselves and questioning the experts, obviously with officers present in accordance with your code of practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. This has been bubbling around in the background for quite some time. Not sure who's chiming, I must admit. Okay. I have a number of concerns with the development. The principle and the idea of the development I don't have a problem with. It's the location. We have a joint area action plan with Southend which allocates this as industrial employment land. If we are to remove that or change that allocation, that leaves us wide open for other areas to be the same. That's my first concern. Secondly, that it is a floodplain area. I believe, and officers will correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe it's floodplain 3 because of the Roach Valley River that runs through there, the highest grade. Is that the right way around? I can never remember that's the right way around.
Say again. Oh, you got it.
Chairman, the only part of the site is in flood zone 2 and 3, so there's varying risks. Flood zone 1 is the area where development should go with the least risk.
Yeah.
Flood zone 2 obviously in the middle, then 3 is the most risk.
I can never remember which way round it is. The other thing I'm concerned about this site, if it was to go forward, is that it will become very isolated. There is no bus routes running through that area. We've been trying to negotiate with bus companies with regards to the Hall Road development, and they are very, very reluctant to even with that in place to bring it forward. So I'm very concerned about the isolation of the area. Other things that if the committee is of a mind to agree to the matter, I would like to see them to take into account is with a number of 106 agreements, particularly around footpaths. There is a tunnel that runs from, it's the old railway tunnel that runs from the original site through to Cherry Orchard Park. I'd like to see some funding put forward to improve that, because that would be something that residents, if they are there, would be the case. And there's no interconnection of footpaths from the site to go right through to Rochford. As there is no bus service, I suspect people will want to walk or cycle. So again, some funding for that side of things. Whether we can actually agree to some funding for bus services, I'm not certain about through 106 agreements, but that's something perhaps also ought to be taken into consideration. But I would like to ask the committee to seriously consider not to defer this again. I don't see really the point. The main reason that in my opinion, that there's not much call for B1 use at the moment is because of what is happening nationally. And that once the issue with the national issues, which I'm sure we're all very aware of, are resolved and our economy starts to change, I believe that issue will change. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do either of our other two non-members wish to speak? No? It's Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. I disagree with Councillor Steptoe in as much as I think that this actually should be deferred. If we're hearing that Southend are looking again at what's happening on the commercial side of it, perhaps we need to know their thoughts before we go ahead with anything. And probably we should have a site visit and see what's going to happen. And that is, I move that we actually defer the application.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Lucas-Gill.
Thank you, Chairman. I must admit, I tend to agree with both Councillor Steptoe and Councillor Shaw, but you're saying that it's totally away from other residential areas. There is a strip of occupied housing that this would back onto in the old Cherry Orchard Lane, not Cherry Orchard Way. So I don't think it would be quite so much out of place as is implied. Also, there is another entrance onto that site, although it is blocked off at the moment. I think it's shown on the plan there, just above the roundabout. Yes, that could be very dangerous if it was opened up. Thank you.
Just listening to what Councillor Shaw said about the deferment, I'm not in favour of deferment at all on this. We've had an application put to us. We have deferred once for clarification, and that clarification has been offered to us in detail. If the applicant wasn't happy with us making a decision, it's for them to withdraw it. So I think we should be making a decision tonight. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. There's two things that really I am worried about with this application. Is that how is the mitigation going to be for that entrance that Mr. Stranks delivered on not being usable, which I feel that it can be used and there will be no policing of that entrance. And the other thing is that being so close to the airport, I would have thought that this was ideal as an industrial site rather than a residential, for the noise that's going to come from other B1 premises close to that site, and the traffic that is going to be delivering and working around the airport, and that there'll be too much for elderly residents, so put over 55s. I'm sure that the over 55s want a quiet life and not one with a busy life with the airport above them. Mm-hmm. However, having said that, some like to do airplane spotting, I suppose. But getting away from that, I don't think that this the whole concept of 2010, when the information was gathered, is not up to scratch. This is 2019 now, 2019, and no, I don't think it should be looked over again. It should be dealt with in the right manner of up-to-date statistics. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to suggest at all that this is a speculative application. It's had a lot of work go into it, but equally, the development of the JAP had an awful lot of work go into it, and I don't believe that this application is substantiated by the level of detailed examination and submission of evidence that all aspects of our JAP and in turn our core strategy have. And as Councillor Stanley suggested, a retirement village complex, whatever you like to call it, next to a busy commercial industrial site doesn't sit well with me, and this development of residential accommodation being so far away from our town centres within the district again doesn't sit right with me. So on that basis, with the items that have previously been put forward for refusal, and with the revised examination of the more recent issues that were presented to us and the clarification on the highways, I'm certainly going to be quite happy to support the officer's recommendation, which is printed on 6.7. So, members, I'll move to that this item be refused based on the recommendations for refusal printed on page 6.7 and 6.8. Those members in favour of the refusal, please indicate. Those against? That item is refused. Thank you. Item 7. Which is land to the east of the Rugby Club, Aviation Way, Rochford. Who's doing this one? Katie. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay. This application relates to the business park just off Cherry Orchard Way. Sorry, I will.
You've got your cards.
Right. I'll say it again. This application relates to the business park off Cherry Orchard Way. The application site itself is located south of the access road. The access road, this application does follow on from an outline planning application that was granted in 2015. The access road and the roundabouts, as you can see and may well be aware, are already in place. The site is south of those access roads. This application is reserved matters, and it's phase 2 within the business park. Phase 1 related to the IPECO building, which is under construction at the moment in the southeast corner of the site. This application relates to a 3-storey building, and they're seeking consent for the appearance of the building, the scale, the layout, access into the site, and landscaping. As you can see from the plan before you, the building is a sort of angled rectangular building. There's 2 blocks to the building that is connected centrally. You can see the car parking is laid out along the eastern flank part of the site. There's extensive landscaping throughout the site. The building will be 3 storeys and measuring 14 metres in height. It has quite a modern appearance. The use of the building will be used for B1, so office and general industrial. with this, there will be a cafe which will be ancillary to the main use. There'll be areas within the building that would be used for meeting rooms, breakout areas. The car parking for the site, as you can see, is along the eastern flank boundary. They are proposing both disabled and electric charging points, not together in the same car parking space though. So as you can see, as I zoomed in, you can kind of see the disabled car parking spaces here and electric charging point spaces here. Up here are for sort of two-wheelers. Also, there's a large amount of cycle parking that's been proposed in the building and outside the building. So there's going to be 18 cycle spaces internally and I think 34 externally. So, I mean, this site itself is promoting kind of sustainable form of transport for the area. The car parking spaces associated with the development does comply with the car parking standards, and it proposes 107 car parking spaces. These all do measure to the dimensions of the car parking standards. This application has been recommended for approval as it is considered to be in accordance with the JAP that's currently in place for this area and the remainder of the development plan as well as the MPPF. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to see this application coming forward. Two reasons. One is it does comply with our Joint Area Action Plan or JAP report and does show a need for some B1 use within the area. I would like to ask the committee if they would also consider some 106 agreements around the use of the site, particularly with access to Cherry Orchard Park. We're going to have lots of people there working, particularly through the summer months, that will be wanting to have access through to Cherry Orchard Park. Again, I've mentioned the tunnel in the previous application. There is an opportunity there that could be utilised. My main concern, though, is that where the new roundabout is, that there's not really any crossing points for pedestrians to cross that particular road. And it is a 50-mile-an-hour road, the Cherry Orchard Way, so I would be a little bit concerned about that. I know the site did originally have connections for cycles, etc., but I would like to see some 106 money again put aside to help improve cycle connections, particularly through to Rochford Station in particular, and also through to the Aviation Way side of things as well, where the buses do actually stop at that end of the Chairman, that's I would ask the committee to consider those particular items if they would, please.
Thank you. Could I ask for a comment on?
Chairman, members will see that the application is a reserved matter application, which is the second half of a planning consent. So the outline planning application that comes forward in the first instance normally brokers all the initial issues of principle, the authorities that require contributions such as highways, etc. They say what they need for the quantum of development. Permission is then granted, the agreement is formalised and signed up to by the people taking over the site, just leaving the submission of the detail. And this is what you have here tonight. You have detailed submissions for a part of the site whereby the people running the site already know what they've got to provide by way of contributions and other infrastructure submissions. Now, unfortunately, I'm not privy to the outline permission that goes before this, but as a matter of principle, to now ask for further contributions, I think we'd be bordering slightly on the unlawful, because they've already had the quantum of development go through the system, and all the contributing authorities have said we need this, we need that, we need the other, and this council has embodied those hopefully in the legal agreement. Now, if there was something unusual about this application that required a contribution over and above what's gone on before, and I don't know that there is, then just exceptionally that might, if you're lucky, be justified. But I'm concerned that there's been an outline that's gone before that's asked for certain things, so the developers know they don't need to provide any more. It's all been considered. It was done at the outline stage. All we've got to do is submit to the council what the buildings are now going to look like, the details, having the confidence in the outline permission that everything we need to do is being done or we're obligated to do through the agreement. So I would caution members that the essential need for these contributions over and above as good and as merit as they may do, we may find, unfortunately, between us, I don't think we're familiar with the outline. Katie isn't here tonight, who probably would have been, and we can't recite it off the top of our heads, but there are bound to be contributions in the outline permission already. Whether they cover the things that members have suggested is maybe another matter, but even if they don't, there is an issue that the outline permission has been granted. It's gone before in all these principal issues, and therefore what's before you now is the second detailed part, as it were, for this particular plot. Thank you.
Thank you. I think members, we need to be very mindful of that specific advice, clear and specific advice from our officers. No members really indicated on this, so Councillor Newport, sorry. Yes, you can as a visiting member. Before
sorry, may I just ask a quick question of Mr. Stranks? Just to fill a slight gap in my knowledge, Mr. Stranks, if this was at the outline planning permission stage, would we actually be able to request section 106 for crossings, or would that be down to highways? Because I was led to believe that would be a highways matter.
Chairman, it is essentially a highways matter, but I mean, if we got into some kind of conflict, we could always defer to go and seek advice from legal. I've known cases where members have felt it a good idea to put, say, a Pegasus crossing in, which is a zebra crossing for horses, and found that they can't implement it, good idea as it might have been, because the nature of the design doesn't suit the safety audit. So highways could never achieve it, so that the request was required and wouldn't be able to implement. That's where, when highways ask for things, there's obviously given it thought as to whether it would work and whether it's essential. Now, if this was an outline permission and members were of the view that that's essentially required, it allows permeability to open spaces, things like this, which all helps, that would probably be a reasonable request. And would it be entirely dependent on highways, because it would be probably landscaping enhancement? But if there was an element of danger to it, despite the gesture, it's best often to have highways view. So it would normally be instigated by highways, or possibly eliminated by highways before they give you their representations. But if members felt strong enough, had this been an outline application, it's probably something we could seek clarification from them.
Okay. Any other non-members want to say anything? Right. Okay. Now to the committee. Councillor Stanley, you'd indicated first.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, there is that. I would like that investigated if a crossing could be put across the highway, and also I don't remember the first application. With so many cycle parking spaces, has the road got a cycle runway to it for the cyclists to come in? The other thing that we've got 102, I think, parking spaces. Do we, as there is, as far as we know so far, that there isn't any transport from buses, etc. Is that adequate? Is that an adequate figure, 102, for how many people are actually going to work on that site? My concern is that if parking is allowed outside of that site, it will somewhat block the roadway at 50 miles an hour. Could end up with a few problems there. So could we find out that if it's adequate or not? As for the building, yep, I think that it's an admirable building. It looks very nice to work in. It's better than what's been laid out before, and I'm quite pleased to see that. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, the classification of this development is for office space and industrial?
Light industrial.
Light industrial. So we've got the ground floor that we saw on the plan that was up there. That's obviously the ground floor. The thing that concerns me is that, yeah, it looks a very pretty building and that, but if you're getting light industrial, you could get engineering companies and the likes underneath there, and that can be quite noisy on occasions. If you've got classy offices where the client here is going to be trying to put this forward as a very high spec office thing. I'm not sure of the viability of the offices under over the top of light industrial. It just seems a mishmash of allocation.
Chairman, if I may, the designation of light industrial, one of the criteria is by reason of vibration, dust, noise or grit. And what they mean is a light industrial use is not very noisy. One good example was when we used to repair television sets. You know, soldering iron, you've got some bits and pieces and that, but you're not making any noise. If you're doing things what we call in the trade metal bashing, if you're making components and parts and you're using machinery, that tends to drop you into the B2 use. Okay, so as a guide for members' understanding, a light industrial use would be the sort of thing you might find acceptable in a residential area. Now, a good example is if you look at the Royal Bank of Scotland building at Tesco on Prince Avenue. That is a B1 use. It's not the high street office like solicitors or somebody might have in a town centre where there's visiting members of the public as such. It's like a call centre operation, things like that. Now, that's a good example of a B1 use. If you have somebody doing an industrial activity that isn't very noisy, that if it was happening in the property next door in the street, you probably wouldn't hear it, that's equally the kind of measure of the noise activity with a B1 use. I'm not sure though if, even in building reg terms, if these people when they're fitting this out, there'd probably be a need for some insulation between the premises anyway. But the B1 use would only allow them a relatively non-noisy industrial activity, whatever that may be, if that helps, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor FD.
Can Katie just shrink that so I can see the entrances? The other way. So I'm interested in the road layout because I want to see if there's.
I think I just need to remind you we're looking at reserved matters arising from appearance, landscaping, the layout and scale.
Yeah, that's fine. It answers my question. Just seeing more of the map.
Right, thank you.
That's fine.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Knowing this area as I do, there was a casual crossing across this road until very recently, and I believe that Essex have closed it off. And as Councillor Steptoe said, this is a 50-mile-an-hour limit, and I would hate to see a crossing down there. I think it would be extremely dangerous. I would like to see this tunnel opened up, but I don't think this particular development is best placed to speak about this. And I would hate to see this deferred because of that. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a great development. Thank you.
I do really think we're straying off what's in front of us, and as I mentioned earlier, we need to take great heed of the officers' advice on that one. Members, I think we need to go to a vote on this one now. We have a recommendation for approval on page 7.1 going through to 7.3. Can I ask those members in favour of the approval to indicate? Indicate. Oh, that's unanimous. Thank you. However, mindful of what members have said, just for information, could we perhaps drop members a note later on to explain traffic issues, crossing issues that were covered at outline stage? Thank you. Right, this next one is item 8, which is land to the rear of 3 to 45 Alexandra Road, Great Wakering. This one's to us a second time as well. Who's taking this one? Katie again.
Thank you. It's me again. Okay, this application was before committee last time in August. This application site is to the east of Alexandra Road, behind sort of a main, behind residential dwellings, in Great Wakering. planning permission is being sought for the demolition of 39A Alexander Road, or Alexander Street, sorry, and they're proposing 25 residential dwellings. They're also proposing to lay out a road to serve the development, which will gain access from Alexander Road. Car parking will be laid out as well for the dwellings, and also visitor car parking, and also a mixture of sort of landscaping as well. There will be a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom dwellings, comprising of detached, semi-detached and terrace properties. For you, kind of gives you an indication of what the appearance of these dwellings will look like. There will be 8 affordable housing units that are proposed as part of the development as well. These will be clustered to the north and south of the site. All plots would have 2 car parking spaces. Apart from the 1 bedroom unit that's being proposed, obviously that would just have 1 car parking space, and these all do measure to the dimensions set out in the parking standards. Like I said, there's also visitor car parking space that's being provided as part of the development. All the dwellings do comply with the nationally described space standards. As well, the rear gardens also comply with the council's SPD2 housing design. Taking you back to the ground floor plan, there is sufficient distances between the proposed dwellings as well as the existing surrounding dwellings, so it's not considered that the development would have a harmful impact on existing occupiers of the residents along Alexander Road. And also it is considered that 25 dwellings could be accommodated on the site, given sort of all the dimensions. The scale, bulk and height of the dwellings are considered acceptable. The application was previously deferred from the last committee on the basis of ecology, South Essex Parking Partnership comments, open space and status of the land. So if I take you through each one individually, there was an ecology report submitted with the application that related to great crested newts and reptiles. The first sort of report was a bit inconclusive, so the council went back to the applicant and sought a further ecology report, and that concluded that there are no great crested newt or reptiles on the site, or present on the site. Also, a bat report was submitted with the application, and also there's no evidence of bats roosting in the building's presence. When I refer to the building presence, I mean the dwelling that's been demolished, 39A, and the garage associated with that dwelling. South Essex Parking Partnership were consulted. These aren't a statutory consultee, but they were consulted anyway regarding sort of the parking in that area. Unfortunately, South Essex Parking Partnership have no comment to make for this particular site or the surrounding roads. Open spaces previously referred to recreation ground in Great Wakering. That was incorrect, and that's now been corrected to state Great Wakering recreation ground in the report, and given the distances from where that is situated from the site. Also, status of the land. This land isn't in the green belt. It's currently an unallocated piece of land in the allocations plan. So therefore, there is no particular use. It's not allocated for a particular use. The site isn't being considered as previously developed land because it was previously used as a nursery, and in accordance with the NPPF, this isn't previously developed land. However, like I say, it is an unallocated piece of land. It's not in the green belt, and this use that has been put forward for the dwellings, residential use, is considered acceptable for this site. This application is still recommended for approval, as it is felt that it's in accordance with the development plan as well as the National Planning Policy Framework, and has been recommended for approval subject to conditions that are already set out in the report, and Section 106 contributions relating to affordable housing, RAMS contribution, and what was the other one? Schools, yes. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one speaker on this item, Mr. Daniel Cross. 5 minutes as usual. Let you go. You've got a minute to go.
I just want to speak really briefly, just focusing on the reasons why the application was deferred till today. So one of the main reasons was open spaces, and Katie's already mentioned the error in the report, and also there was concern about the amount of public spaces. So in the period since the last meeting, we produced an open spaces drawing which identifies all of the public open space areas, both free and membership only. So it shows that there's a wide variety of different park spaces and different uses, all within close proximity to the site and a short walking distance. So hopefully that alleviates any concerns regarding provision of open spaces. Secondly, we talked about parking provision quite heavily in the last meeting. So whilst the scheme is completely policy compliant, the size of the bays are policy compliant, and the level of visitors parking is policy compliant, there was concerns raised regarding the incorporation of a new junction off of Alexandra Road and the impact that had on loss of on-street parking on Alexandra Road. So we produced this drawing in the last period just to show the loss of spacing equates to 2, but the new adoptable roads within the site have the opportunity to provide 8 new on-street parking. As it's adoptable, it's open to anyone to use that road for parking. So again, hopefully that alleviates the concern regarding loss of on-street parking when we're looking at a net gain overall. Talked about the ecology report, and hopefully the concerns raised about the lack of one have been addressed, and you've had a chance to flick through the original report. Finally, I just want to finish on, there was concerns raised regarding demolition and works undertaken on site prior to the application being submitted. So I just wanted to clarify what that work entailed. When the applicant first got access to the site, it was quite overgrown. There were existing glass houses to the rear parcel of the site. They had broken glass, a tree was growing through one. There were signs of access on site by other people. So through consultation with their health and safety advisors, they were recommended to remove the glass houses and clear the site to allow consultants access to topographical, the ecology surveyors on site. The front portion of the site has not been touched. The house is still standing. So it was just site clearance for safety reasons. So just to finish, I hope you can support the application. A lot of thought and hard work has gone into making a scheme that is fully policy compliant and well thought out. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it working? Yes. I'm sorry, I'm just going to touch on a couple of points that the speaker raised. I don't accept at all the reasons for clearing the site. The site was cleared. Whether there were greenhouses or glass there was no respect for the environment and the habitation that were there. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. Now, if the committee could please go through their papers with me, because you might want to make some notes. I can't ask questions of the officers, but you can. Page 8.6.17. Prior to development, a method statement for the installation of the no-dig shall be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority, etc. Who will be the agricultural supervisor be, as there needs to be some degree of assurances for the residents. This developer has shown no concern for their well-being so far, so I would like to see this as a council directive to be able to provide the supervisor. Page 8.7.21. It has the hours permitted there. Please read through them. It says Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. for general works. This is an infill site. This backs on to families and families with young children who are probably in bed before that time. Please read those times. These are totally unacceptable. As I mentioned, it's an infill. It's surrounded by homes. The officers know the issues that enforcement team already face in managing sites to comply with the times. These definitely need to be reassessed. I would suggest 9 to 5 for weekdays would be more than acceptable, allowing residents respite from building site noise literally in their back garden. I know one local site already has issues with the language from site staff, and I don't want my families to have to put up with that. No weekend works and no bank holidays. Page 8.4, 3.31. Just drawing attention to the fact it says it is not, sorry, I've gone out of sync a little bit, haven't I? It is not considered that the proposal will have a detrimental impact upon the private amenity of the occupiers of these properties in relation to having an overbearing or overlooking impact. All I can say is absolutely rubbish. Of course, this development's going to have a detrimental impact. So that's actually just incorrect. Page 8.17. Point 3.44 is the, about the access to the Spine Road. The speaker has just said that there will be confirmed a further 8 on-street parking spaces made available. I don't know how a condition can be put in that that is recorded and that it isn't taken away when residents move in and want to stick up a private road at the start of it or start policing it themselves. I would also like to officers, if possible, through the committee, to confirm that that parking will not obstruct any large vehicles that need to enter the site, such as our amenity vehicles, refuse lorries, emergency vehicles, etc. 3.45 also on there. Adequate parking. So this actually covers 0.25 spaces, and they have provided that. There is no more I can do about the parking on site. Page 8.8, 3.51 and 3.54. When covering the replacement of trees and shrubs. It would be good to see an actual number. Are we removing 10 trees and replacing with 2? More details, please. 3.56. Quite an interesting one, this. It refers to the development being in flood zone 1, as identified in the Environment Agency maps. Perhaps the committee would like to ask of the officers the date of these maps. I say this because this council has signed up to the climate emergency. We, the local councillors, know that the climate will affect the classification of flood zones. How old is this data that officers are referring to? Are we, the council, prepared to accept this data? You might want to, at the same time on this subject, refer to page 8.20. There's the report there from Natural England, which appears to take a much more sensible approach. Have a look at 3.67. Then there's 3.59 regarding foul drainage. So Anglia Water. Anglia Water don't live locally, and they don't understand the problems this area already faces. And yet, Anglia Water are saying they have no objections. On that one, I just despair, because anybody who lives anywhere near that road knows the problems we have with drainage. We've then got on page 8.21, point 3.75, relating to the substation. And it reads that the substation building is not considered to have a detrimental impact. This is situated to the rear of number 39, so I ask anyone in this chamber Would you want a substation built at the back of your home? Of course it's going to have a detrimental effect on that resident. Now, I have a question that perhaps the committee could put to the officers regarding the affordable rent properties. Should this application be approved? I don't know if there's a condition that can be added for these to be looked at being managed by a local social housing landlord. Because although whoever takes them over, we would have 100% nomination rights, in the future it's always easier long term to work with local social housing landlords when there are issues in the future with them. Just one last point, there is a mention of there will be provision for all site vehicles to be parked on site. Perhaps the committee could ask the officers how this would be policed. I've already got issues in another part of my ward, and are they going to have the 6 parking spaces that are going to be provided, which are meant to be for the residents? Because I can guarantee you they will be parking on the road. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Most of the bits and pieces I was going to raise, Councillor next to me has already raised. A couple of questions I would perhaps suggest the committee need to ask. One is with regards to the substation. Substations do make noise. I'd like to know how that is mitigated. If anybody's lived near one, as I have done in the past, they make a sort of continuous buzzing noise.
Yeah, definitely.
How do they mitigate that? My main concern still is around the parking. Those that know Alexandra Road know that it is a very narrow road. My concern is how are they going to deal with deliveries of vehicles, bringing in materials? What happens if they turn up before the working hours? Where do they go? They certainly can't park in the high street because that's bad enough as it is, and there is no space in Alexandra Road. So something needs to be considered, and I would ask the committee to perhaps consider that within the scenario. Other than that, Chairman, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Cross said that he'd put in plans to a plan into our planning office regarding showing the open spaces. Have we got that, please? I'm just quoting what he said. He said he put in, showed you a plan with all the different open spaces around the area. Have we got that, please?
Don't have it planned, no, but I've got maps up here.
But that doesn't actually show where the open spaces are for this 25 dwellings. What they could use. I'm just asking if we've got the plan, because if someone's actually said it's there, I just wonder if we actually had it. Okay, thank you. Can you send us a copy?
I can send you a copy, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. According to the page item 8.15, we have 10 properties with 4 and 5 bedrooms, and yet we're told that there are only 2 parking spaces for those homes. I've got to turn around and say there's got to be 3 or 4 parking spaces at least, on the basis that there'll be, for 4 bedrooms, there'll be a grown-up family there eventually, whether they move in straight away or whether they start off as young people. So I'm not happy with that at all, on the basis that they will have to put their cars somewhere else, and that may be in Alexandra Road, which is another sort of parking issue which may arise later on. Also, the size of rooms, although the minimum, and these are, it seems as though we're just over the minimum required by the space standard, and some of them are just about on the minimum. There's a 3-bed that I can see is just on the minimum. Is there any way of rectifying that to bring it up to a little bit of a higher standard, especially where we've got a 3-bed and it's just on that minimum size. Is that just the requirement we ask of a developer, to go for a minimum size, or can we ask for something a little bit larger than just the minimum size, on the basis that like everybody else, they need as much room as they can get hold of, and obviously the site is built to a minimum size or minimum standards. I'd like to see a little bit more of, not minimum, but over minimum, if that's possible. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Eaves.
There's one particular issue that stands out to me that no one's picked up on so far. Page 8.27, paragraph 431. I'll read it as it's written. It is considered by Anglian Water that development will lead to an unacceptable risk of flooding downstream. The paragraph goes on to say that they will expect to work with the developer in the future to do any work necessary on that. I think it would be quite remiss of us to actually pass this application without knowing what that mitigation actually is. I do say again, Anglian Water have said that it will lead to unacceptable risk of flooding downstream. Thank you.
Councillor FD.
Just like pick up on a couple of points that Councillor Macpherson made. One is the parking again. People who know Alexander Road know that there's parking both sides on the pavement. They've put some more parking spaces in. I don't know if you've got the plan there, Katie. So where they've actually put the parking, it's the green parts, isn't it? I don't know if everybody can see that. Might be worth blowing it up a little bit if you can. Nearly there.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
All right, where's added the green parts there? I can't see it not interfering with large vehicles going down there. I don't know. You're going to get parking on both sides again. What's the width of the road? Is the width of the road, does it leave enough space so something to get through the centre?
We've been advised that the width of the road is to an adoptable standard.
Is to adoptable standard, okay. Okay, and the other point I've got is the work times they've got on there, as Councillor McPherson said, from 7 a.m. all the way through to 7 o'clock in the evening, especially with young children living in houses just virtually on the site. And especially with other sites we've had down in Great Wakery, it's caused a lot of problem with noise and not great language and stuff like that. Maybe something we need to look at in the future for infill sites, to maybe make the starting hours a little bit later, make it up on the other end maybe. Okay. There's loads of, and also I think we've got a lack of information, as Councillor Shaw said, what's happening with the open spaces on the site. I know there are going to be open spaces somewhere, but it doesn't actually really show. And what's meant by private open spaces and public open spaces. I know it says down by the recreation ground for public. Again, it's quite unclear. So I wouldn't mind actually deferring this until we get proper answers on this.
Okay. Councillor Wilson. Yeah, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, there seems to be an awful lot of unanswered questions, an insignificant amount of unanswered questions, and I would like to propose that we defer this once again for further details to come forward.
I think if we could take some answers from our officers first, please, and particularly stress around the traffic management issues and at the Anglian Water
Yes. With regards to your Anglian Water point, you have read obviously correctly in the officer's report, but there are conditions that have been imposed that relate to the drainage water strategy, which are conditions 4 to 6. So this requires further information, so that adequately deals with Anglian Water's concerns. So like I say, it is covered by conditions. Relating to the car parking that Councillor Stanley raised, I know 4 to 5 bedrooms, and I know you have concern over the lack of car parking. However, they do provide, these houses do have 2 car parking spaces allocated to them, and that is in accordance with the highway, the parking standards that have been adopted. So they do comply with that. Room sizes also, I know obviously you don't appreciate that they've produced a minimum. However, our advice to developers is that they've got to comply with the national space standards, and as far as we are concerned, these do comply with the national described space standards. Whilst you may not appreciate that, unfortunately it does comply. The width of the road is 5.5, which I think Councillor FD raised. This is to an adoptable standard. Operating hours, there has been a condition imposed 7 till 7, Monday to Friday. As well, within that condition, there is an 8 till 5 o'clock. So operating from 7 o'clock in the morning allows builders or workers to access the site without the clash of school traffic. I think schools start 8 o'clock at 8:30, primary schools. So this allows workers to get onto site at 7. However, they're not actually allowed to start any noisy works, such as concrete breaking, piling, pile driving and angle driving until 8 o'clock in the morning. Like I say, it's 7 till 7. If we reduce those hours to 9 till 5 Monday to Friday and not having any works taking place at weekend, we will be prolonging that development, and that will then go on longer than anticipated. So that's my advice on that one. Someone did mention about an agricultural supervisor. That would be someone that is I think it'd be employed by herself. I don't think it would be council, would it? It'd be someone that, it would have to be obviously a registered agricultural person, but it'd be a supervisor that obviously they would employ themselves. Or we do have, would James Choate as well do that? No. Yeah, our council officer, James Choate, would work alongside the developer to supervise any works that are taking place to trees, shrubs, etc. on site. I think I've covered everything. If you can remind me if I haven't covered everything.
Can I just point you to one more on 8.28, 4.38. Essex Police have said like to discuss with developer crime prevention. Do we know whether that's happened or?
I don't know if that's actually taken place as yet, but that advice will be given to the developer, and it's down to the developer to then contact with the police to discuss any crime prevention, any measures that they can put in place to prevent crime from taking place on this site.
Right, thank you. I think members, this is the second time this item has come before us. I think, to be fair in the way in which we administer our decision-making process, we needed to raise last time all of the particularly pertinent issues that we needed to make a decision, and those issues were raised last meeting, and they've been answered, whether to your liking or not is another matter, this time. So I do think that it is appropriate to make a decision. There's lots of points being brought up, but I think they are more around issues that can be conditioned or sorted with the developer. I don't think they're fundamental to stopping a decision being made. I've got 3 members that have indicated they'd like a second go. Anyone else? Right, we'll go Councillor Stanley first. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wotton first then.
Chairman, thanks. Really picking up on various points. We haven't actually had an answer, but I appreciate it wasn't a member that raised the question of the substation, the buzzing of a substation, and I totally understand the point that was made a little earlier. We haven't actually seen the evidence of the open space requirement, which was clearly an issue. I'm really concerned about the times. the operating times. With the best will in the world, people push the limits. Building companies do push the limits, and we are in the middle of a residential area. I would want to see wheel washing facilities put in because the mud that is brought onto streets. But I think the biggest issue for me is 4.31, which is really reflecting Councillor Eaves' point. I don't think it is good enough to bring a clause which actually says the development from an authority, the development will lead to an unacceptable risk of flooding downstream. We see regularly now pictures on our television screens of the awful state that flooding brings, and to have that rather airy-fairy, well, we will work to sort it out, is totally unacceptable in terms of presenting detail to us. So for that reason, I couldn't support the application as it's currently set out. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. As was just mentioned, and regarding the Anglian Water issue, what my concern there is, and I have to apologise, I wasn't at the last planning meeting because I was on holiday. But the issue for that with me is if we put that as a condition on there, we're talking about downstream. Where is it going to affect? It'd be quite reckless of us, I think, to actually pass this without indication of where this effect is going to be and what the mitigation of those possible issues might be. It's too wide to just say, yes, get on with it, come up with something and expect us to sit back and say, yes, it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to point out that, as you already know, I'm very in with this flooding thing, and we have got two sites very, very local to this very place we're sitting in at the moment, where they have mitigated their surface water. I don't see any mitigation on the surface water from this site, and as pointed out, that it's a will it happen or won't it happen, and it's a discussion not between us and the developer, but between Anglian Water and the developer, which we should be entitled to view what the conditions will be and how they will mitigate it. On the basis, on also the parking area, I do feel that 2 parking bays is not sufficient for a 4 and 5 bedroom property, considering that you could have 1 parking bay with a caravan on it, which probably will have. Most people use caravans now because they can't afford foreign holidays, especially as the flights have now been discontinued with Thomas Cook. However, I do think that there should be some mitigation as to parking off-road and not on-road, and also to where the amenities are for the general use of the public. Therefore, I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Councillor Rafferty.
Again, I agree with Councillor Stanley with the Anglian Water, and as this developer seems to do the bare minimum with everything, I don't really want to see the bare minimum done with regard to flooding, especially down in Great Wakefield. Also, I'd like to point out to the officer that the Wakefield is quite strange with school times because the bus picks them up at, I think it's about 7:30 in the morning. So the times you got on here will clash completely with school times. So it needs to be looked at better on where individual places are. Thank you. So I can't support this.
Okay.
Reason with the flooding.
Chairman, just to help members perhaps with the Anglian Water comment, it doesn't strike me that's an objection they're raising to the scheme. When they say we will have to work with, what they're trying, I think, to communicate across is as the drainage authority, they have a responsibility. So they're anticipating there will be a certain outcome from the development that they will then have to accommodate and manage. Okay, now that's what they do on a daily basis. And I think what they're trying to say is they will have to work with the developer. They have their own legislation that they go to the developer and seek mitigation, compensation, or whatever it is they have to do. When you're implementing development like this, the planning permission is not the only thing you need. You need building regs, you need consents from the statutory undertakers, Anglian Water, the drainage authorities, all these people. So they're headlining to you that they see a problem and they're going to have to work with the developer to fix it. But my dealings with Anglian Water tend to be they work in their closed environment under the Water Act or whatever it is they're working with. I think to some extent you can be reassured. I understand that members are concerned when they see the danger words there, unacceptable risk of flooding downstream. They're naturally assuming, and perhaps rightly so, that somebody somewhere is going to get it, and you know this committee and these members have the responsibility for it. But I think what Anglian Water are suggesting there is that they're spotting a problem, and outside of this process they will go off and seek to resolve that with the developer. And I think you'll find that the legislation that Anglian Water is empowered by allows them to approach the developer and fix it. So you know, you may see a farmer suddenly having to widen a ditch or something like that, but Anglian Water says, well, the watercourse crosses your land, we need you to do this, we will come in with a digger, we want 10-foot easement or something to do that, and they undertake these works. So I don't think, if you were to think, well, this is unacceptable, let's refuse permission for drainage reasons, I don't think Anglian Water are suddenly rush to your defence because they said, well, we were going to deal with this. You know, they haven't perhaps been clear, and maybe members seek that clarification, but my understanding of the process is Anglian Water will be looking to do these things under their remit in what they do, if that helps, Chairman.
Councillor Wotton, that was particularly your point.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Mr Stranks for that very helpful clarification, and that's much appreciated. Doesn't particularly help this particular application in terms of the words that are written here, but I would have been much more reassured to see a clause in there saying there are a range of possible options and we will work to resolve it. But it's rather black and white in terms of the way it's written currently. Thank you.
Mr Stanley.
Can I remind the officers and the committee that there is legislation and it says something in the order of it is not permitted to put water where it's not naturally intended. So in this respect, if it's not naturally intended to flow downstream to other occupants, then this should be dealt with in the order of putting ponds in or swales or whatever the case is that you need to do to mitigate it. Thank you very much.
Members, I clearly get the feeling that this is an application that you don't like for a variety of reasons. However, we have had from our officers clear advice and through the deferment clarification that this application is compliant where it needs to be. We've had some clarification about the way in which Anglia Water might work. When making your decision, if you're making a decision not to approve something, which we'll move to in just a minute, then the obligation would be to make a reason, ultimately, if it is not successful, for refusal. And that reason for refusal has to be substantial and supportable. So members, we have a recommendation for approval printed on page 8.1 going through with its various items through to 8.7. Those members in favour of the approval, please indicate. 2, 3, 4. Those against? No, not at this point. 1, 5. That item is lost. So we now need to move forward. Councillor Eaves, you wish to say something?
Yes, could I propose that we defer the decision until the next meeting? I think we do need clarification on the flood issue. We do need clarification on a lot of the issues that have actually come forward.
For fairness to the applicant,
yes.
I don't want the term clarification on a lot of issues. I want clarification on a specific list of issues, please.
Flooding, and the Anglian water proposals, because I think, although I've heard Mr. Strank's explanation, I think with the experiences that we are having with flooding now, we need to know definitely what Anglian water are proposing.
Okay, thank you.
The position of the transformer, can that be moved?
Yeah. Substation.
The substation,
yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
Or certainly its noise footprint.
Yeah. What could be done to
with that?
Sorry. Open spaces.
The open spaces.
If we could have confirmation on that.
Location.
Yeah.
The working hours.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
I think, you know, bear in mind we're still a planning committee, and it's information to inform our planning decision. Okay. So, members, was anyone prepared to second Councillor Eaves? Yeah. Okay. The members, just being fair and transparent all round, we're deferring. We've asked for information on flooding, the transformer, the open spaces, the working hours. No. The information for those answers will allow you to make a full and final decision. Okay. Those members in favour of the deferment, please indicate. Okay. Those against? Right. That item's now deferred. Sorry. Sorry, not at this moment. It's not appropriate now. It's the way the system works. Right. Next one is item 9, land to north of London Road, south of Rawrath. There's a smaller bit of information on the addendum. Who's got this one? Okay.
Chairman, this is a reserved matters application for a proposed change to the siting of utility infrastructure in association with the development approved for up to 500 dwellings by Outline Planning Commission at land north of London Road and south of Rawrath Lane, Rayleigh in 2016. This parameters plan shows the wider approved development of the above site, phase 1 of which is currently underway. So this is the site in its entirety. And phase 1 is these 2 beige parcels just at the top here, which are currently under construction. Could I have plan 2, please, Katie? Thank you. The development incorporates an electricity substation and a gas pressure reduction installation, PRI. These have previously been approved as part of a 2017 application for utility infrastructure at this site, but the substation was to be located within the residential area of phase 1 and the PRI within the strategic landscaping alongside the Rawrath Lane Industrial Estate Road. They are now both proposed to be located within the strategic landscaping fronting Rawrath Lane. So as you can see here, we've got the substation located in just to the west of the main access road coming into the site here, and the gas PRI to the east of it. Originally, we were looking at within the actual residential area here for the substation, and the PRI was just going to be slightly further off map down here alongside the actual Rawrath Industrial Estate Road. So we're now looking at them having frontages looking onto Rawrath Lane. Could I have plan 3, please, Katie? Plan 3. Oh, brilliant. The substation would have a mansard-style roof and would be sited approximately 14 metres from the Rawrath Lane frontage. So that's what we're looking at here. So this would be the substation style, and that's what we would be looking at here with the mansard-style roof, relatively modest type substation. And then plan 4 is the gas PRI. So here we're looking at a flat roof structure. Again, this would be slightly closer actually to the road, approximately 3 metres from the Rawrath Lane frontage. So the key material planning considerations are layout and design. If we could just pop back to layout 2, please, Katie. So the substation and gas PRI be located in the soft landscape space, but would not be considered to interfere with this to any substantial degree. This area represents a substantial swathe of soft landscaping, and sufficient grassland and trees would remain within the scheme to soften the appearance of this infrastructure within the landscape. There was a requirement within the approved strategic landscaping application for a hedge to the Royal Flame frontage to be retained. The current application would be likely to result in the removal of an element of this hedging to make way for the gas PRI and its necessary access from Royal Flame. This is not considered objectionable, however, it will require an application to vary conditions attached to the strategic landscaping reserve matters and outline applications. The overall design of the proposed substation and gas PRI is considered acceptable. A query was raised with the agent regarding whether there is potential for antisocial behaviour relating to the flat roof of the gas PRI. The agent has advised as follows, with just a little bit of additional information from their perspective on that. They've said that the PRI unit is located on a site that is not readily accessible on foot, in the sense that there is no footway existing or planned for the south side of Royal Lane in this location, and the site is not readily accessible from the open space to the south. Whilst there is obviously a footpath on the north side of Royal Lane, this isn't a location where people will generally be walking past or have easy access to on foot. They also go on to say, as you know, the scheme as a whole has significant areas of open space, which are much more readily available as locations for play and youth activity. And in particular, the scheme will be providing an area specifically designed for youth activities in due course, i.e. there are alternative opportunities deliberately built into the scheme to encourage youth activity elsewhere. And then finally they state the structures use a standardised GRP enclosures which are used all over the country for exactly this purpose and are designed to be robust, resistant to damage and fit for this purpose. It is also not a structure that a pitched roof could just be added onto to try and prevent antisocial behaviour. So that's their comments on that, on the antisocial behaviour point that was raised. Chairman, this application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Councillor Newport. Right.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman.
Oh, beg your pardon. Have we got speakers on this one? Oh, not speaker. No. Right, sorry. Yeah, so do carry on.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I'm pleased to see that they've moved the substation away from the residential amenity, because I think they do buzz a little bit. Just on with regard to the removal of that hedging, is that just during the construction period? Are they going to replan, or do they need to leave that open ongoing?
Okay, Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. Don't have any particular concerns about the application itself, but I would ask the members of the committee to consider asking for a condition to be placed upon it that any works that happen to go into the existing highway that need to make the connections to this, that a condition is placed upon it that the developer and or the utility companies need to coordinate their work with highways and the local planning department with regards to potential traffic issue mitigation around the area, because there's a considerable number of other developments going on at the same time. So perhaps the committee would consider asking for that as a condition.
Members, unusually, I'll just ask that what Councillor Steptoe is taken on but verbatim and added in whatever form is appropriate as a condition. Would members be happy with that, although none of us have specifically said those words? Yeah, okay.
Shall I come back on the hedging first? And
yeah, if you just want to deal with those two, and then we'll go to the committee.
With regards to the hedging, it would be a permanent removal for that particular section, because it would enable access from the actual Royal Lane for them to come in and do any maintenance works that they would need to. So it would be a permanent section that would be removed. However, there is such a large amount of soft landscaping that we're expecting there that it's not considered it's going to have a substantial impact with that sort of quite small section there that would require removal. That's the officer's perspective.
And you're okay with the...
With regards to the condition, I'd just be slightly concerned about whether it would meet the necessary tests, because we're starting to stray into sort of other areas requiring everyone to sort of coordinate together. That would really be for highways and utility infrastructure to deal with themselves independently, I would say, normally.
I think you could say you've understood the will of the committee that this small application as it is does not add to the problems that have been experienced, which are quite considerable, and by whatever the planning process is, we need to ensure that this is coordinated on a greater scale. On to our members now then. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've watched this progress of the site, which there was a ditch around the field which actually accommodated, because the field where this is taking place has 3 different elevations, one towards the Royf Lane, one towards the farm, and the other elevation went towards the industrial estate. I feel that the gas unit should be taken further back for the purpose of people walking in the road, where I feel that there may be an extension to the pathway later by highways, and this would cause an obstruction, and I think that we should somehow give notice that perhaps the gas unit should be as the same distance as what the electricity unit is away from the highway, and also on the basis that there are a lot of heavy vehicles that turn into the industrial estate, and I really would like it as accident proof as possible, by not having a gas facility put so close to the highway. That's not to turn around and say that there won't be an accident or will be an accident, but let's try and mitigate it as far as we possibly can. I'd like to see that, and also that the pathway, people will have to cross that road to get on the footpath the other side. Now, I've got to turn around and say that they probably won't. They'll walk in the road, and I can see there being some sort of form of a footpath going down that side. I know it hasn't had in the past, but then we haven't had 500 homes with 500 children coming out and going down the road to walk to school at Downhall Road School. And I feel that we need to somehow make provision. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Okay. Members, the application is for units in this location, and that's what we must determine. Councillor Efty.
Where the actual substations are due to be, the substation in PRO, it's currently been approved as part of the strategic landscaping of the overall scheme. So it's not usable amenity space as such, it's a landscaping swathe to provide visual amenity to the scheme, quite a large expanse of it.
Okay.
So what I was interested when I asked that question was, I think it's very good that they've moved the substation and both stations away from the residential. I don't want to see it in the future as maybe as an infill. That's happened sometimes. We need to know precisely what that land is, if it's brownfield or is it sort of scheduled residential and they just use a bit of it for that, or is it
the parameters plan has approved it as amenity space, not as part of the residential parcels of the site.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask about the PRI? There's going to be some parking in front of it for service vehicles. Is that going to be completely off of the highway?
Actually, I think if you can zoom in a little bit to this one, I might show it a bit more. So yes, just to confirm, I don't know if you can see from that zoomed in, but it would be off the highway, yes.
Members, we've got a recommendation for approval printed on 9.1. Ask those members in favour of the approval, please indicate. Those against? That item is approved. Thank you. Next one, 10.1, application referred from the weekly list, 22 South Street, Rochford.
Chairman, this application is to reinstate and convert an existing outbuilding to provide 2 one-bedroom dwelling units at 22 South Street, Rochford. The site is located on the western side of South Street within Rochford Town Centre and within the area covered by the Rochford Centre Area Action Plan. The site is also within the Rochford Conservation Area. So as you can see here, this is the site here. So we've got South Street coming down here and the site area is to the west. And we've got a building fronting it already. And then this is the actual building we're referring to as part of this application here. The application site is comprised of a 3-storey Grade 2 listed building, which is number 22, which fronts the street and is in use as 12 bedsits. Vehicular access to the site is to the southern side of the main building and access is a parking area to the rear. This area also contains a cycle and refuse store. The outbuilding to which the proposal relates is sited on the northern boundary. Can I have plan 2, please, Katie? The existing outbuilding to which the application relates is fire damaged and disused. It was previously in use as a garage, store and office. So this is the building with the existing layouts, as you can see, and we've got garaging, store and office facilities here. And this is what it previously looked like prior to sort of being fire damaged. If we have plan 3, please, Katie. And this is the current proposal. So the current proposal includes a modest increase in height of the outbuilding with a slate roof finish, rebuilding of the front wall with new brickwork to match the existing and new fenestration, along with internal works to enable the conversion. One of the units will be fitted out to provide disabled accommodation. So the key material planning considerations are the use, design, car parking, refuse, residential amenity space, the technical housing standards, ecology and trees. So with regards to the use, the proposal for use of the building as bedsits would accord with Policy 8 of the Area Action Plan, which identifies that residential uses within this part of the town centre would be acceptable. Looking at the design, the MPPF requires that development preserve and enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. The County Historic Buildings Advisor initially raised concern with regards to the proposal. However, during the course of the application, revised plans were received, which removed a proposed extension and reduced the dwelling unit numbers from 3 to 2. As a result, the County Historic Buildings Advisor no longer objects to the scheme. Looking at the car parking, the site provides adequate car parking and cycling provision for the town centre location, and there is access to public transport nearby as well. We're looking at refuse. The existing provision at the site would adequately cater for 2 additional units. Residential amenity, the proposal would not be considered to cause any issues regarding overlooking or overshadowing at the site. The amenity space, although no private amenity space is proposed on site, there is public open space, a relatively short walk away. This is not considered alone to represent a justified reason for refusal here. The technical housing standards, now there's no specific sizing requirement within the standards for bedsit accommodations. The lowest it goes down to is 1-bedded flats. Therefore, the sizing proposed is not considered objectionable here. Looking at ecology and trees, the existing building has suffered substantial fire damage and it's considered unlikely that the proposal would impact adversely on any protected species, including bats. There are no trees at or close to the site that would be adversely affected by the proposed development. Chairman, this application is recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to pick up on the amenity space for this particular site. The officer has already mentioned that there is amenity space in parks. Very close by, there is the Rochford Reservoir, which is just down the road, and the other one, which is the best kept secret in Rochford, and that's Millview Meadows, otherwise known as Teletubbyland, again in a very short space as a thing. The particular use that this building is likely to receive, it is important for the district and for the area, and I do feel that the fact that it is a town centre unit that we do not need to worry about the amenity space. There are many properties within that location, particularly in Back Lane, that do not have any amenity space either, and they've been there quite happily for quite a considerable time. So I would ask the committee members to not to worry about the amenity space, as there is plenty of space nearby.
That's a Newport.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been asked to present this statement by Councillor Christine Mason, as she's been unable to attend tonight. So I'll just read from what she's given me here. Councillors Mrs. Diane Hoy and Mrs. Christine Mason visited similar properties used by Rochford District Council for emergency and temporary accommodation in Westcliff-on-Sea and Southend-on-Sea, and spoke to some of the residents. One of the constant and common opinions voiced by our residents was the value of the communal amenity space. Although this space differed greatly between the two premises, and these residents had differing needs and histories, all were in a vulnerable situation, and the communal amenity spaces permitted peer assistance and a sense of community. Indeed, one premises, a group Christmas meal was produced by the residents, and they were very proud of the achievement. South Street, whilst providing valuable temporary accommodation, was designed and subsequently approved by this authority without any communal space other than a very small outbuilding that houses washing machines. Indeed, although the rooms allow for family accommodation, when councillors were shown round prior to the occupation, one of the main concerns we raised with the officers was both the lack of community space and the fact that residents had no table and would be expected to perch on their beds or a chair, which wasn't provided, and eat off their laps. We do not know if these concerns were subsequently addressed or not. The existing 12 bedsits imply 12 individuals. This is not the case, as the rooms were designed for maximum occupation. Indeed, in the 12 bedsits, there are a total of 24 beds and 2 cots, which would indicate a possible occupation of 26 people. However, officers advise us that if necessary, they will top and tail 2 children to a bed, so the mental image most of us have of a bedsit accommodation 1 person is way out. Unfortunately, the average time for families in such accommodation is around 3 months. However, this application seeks to provide similar bedsit accommodation, including one for a resident with disabilities, without any provision for community support or amenity space within the site. Having read the material planning considerations, which quite naturally focus on the physical attributes of the application, I am concerned the officer's report apparently consider the lack of on-site amenity space acceptable. This is despite the fact that amenity space within the area, and I quote, to the rear of number 22, was indicated on the approved plans for the conversion of number 22 in 2016 for use as amenity space. No such soft landscape provision has been made on site. End quote. The report states that because there is amenity space nearby, the lack of amenity space is considered acceptable. As the original application deemed it necessary, I cannot see how this conclusion is now drawn. The officer report that the car park, when not in use, could be used as an informal amenity space when not fully occupied is actually outrageous. Would you want your children to sit and play in the middle of a car park and next to a refuse store? Would you feel safe and secure sunbathing or resting in such an area? Of course not. The report states that because there is amenity space nearby, I am surprised that rather than enforce a condition that's been ignored by the council is recommending approval of an intensification of this issue. No community space and no amenity space is just not an acceptable way to house any of our residents. Yet Rochford District Council, Strategic Housing fully support this application, as they have worked with the applicant on developing the other property at 22 South Street, an application that has not conformed to the planning provision. I ask that this committee consider refusing this application on the grounds of inappropriate development by lack of amenity space and over-intensification of the site, which is already demonstrated by the existing use of 3+ in one room, or a norm of 26 residents in 12 rooms? Thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
Sorry, Chairman, I didn't expect that quick. Listening to the statement, I can totally agree with it. The problem is we haven't got endless amount of places, and to my knowledge, unless we can't provide an amenity space within this build. But what we can provide is for those people who exist already in bedsits in Westcliff, the other side of Southend, they can come back into the district. At least they're there within their network of friends, where the schools are that their children can go to. It's a very difficult situation that you've got to balance here. In an ideal world, yes, I'd want amenity space. We haven't got an ideal world. Would I prefer people to be in this accommodation here? I think that's what you want to ask them. Or likewise, accommodation the other side of Southend. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've heard the comments made. However, we are not trying to put people in rabbit hutches or put people on top of people, shoulder to shoulder. I do feel that some amenity space should be given. I've got amenity space even in my front garden. That's my amenity space, where I can, should I wish to, maybe go out and have a cup of tea out in the garden or such like, or those sort of things. This seems to me to be just a room within a room within a room. There is no room for anyone to breathe. And are we going to put people in these conditions? I know we need the housing. I know we've got so many people waiting to go on the list and waiting for a home. But do they want to live cheek by jowl with others? I don't think so. I think everybody needs a practical space, and I think that this should be refused on that basis. Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor McPherson. This is a very, very difficult application we've got, but we do need to bring local people back into the area, as she's already stated. Can I ask that there's, if this is approved, if a small area in the car park could we make a condition on this, that a small area could just have a small seating area? Because I do believe that when I've been around there, women or men are sitting out there smoking anyway with a little chair. So it just make it a little bit more nice, really, I suppose.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's not the right word either.
Councillor Eaves.
That wasn't the right word.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, but no, bit Essex.
A couple of things. Quoting from the report, although amenity space within the area in the rear of 22 was indicated on the approved plans, no such soft landscaping provision had been made on site. Was that subject to enforcement? If not, why not?
I'm not aware that it has been subject to enforcement, no. It's not something that I've spoken to them directly about, but I'm not aware of it, no.
You see, this is a clear case of going against what we as a committee decided. So I am absolutely shocked.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making, but we need to focus on this particular planning application.
Okay, moving on then to the next sentence. The area in the rear serves as a car parking area and could also be used for informal amenity use in part where the car park is not fully occupied. That is astounding to be used as a condition suggesting that that is going to fulfil the amenities space. Let me give you an instance. If you say, if we as a council say that the children who may be there can go and use this amenity area, which is a car park, and a car drives in there and has an accident with a kiddie, who do you think that family are going to be suing? We have then put a condition on ourselves where we are increasing risk hugely to the council. That is out of order. To even suggest that the car park is used as an amenity area, madness. The other thing is to consider that the amenity areas that are close should be considered as part of this. I couldn't disagree with Councillor Steptoe more, to be honest. I'd like to ask committee members here, how many people in this room here would like to, when they go out their door, walk 200 yards to get into their back garden? It just will not happen, and it will not be regarded as such. So why we are regarding close parks as official amenity areas for this is ridiculous. I would like to finish just by quoting from our very own Local Development Framework Development Management, page 6, and it says, in our vision is to make Rochford District a place which provides opportunities for the best possible quality of life for all who live, work and visit here. I do agree with Councillor Stanley here that if we actually are putting everyone, shutting them in their rooms and no amenity space, and that is effectively what we're proposing here, that we are not actually even taking any notice of our own vision. And I would actually suggest that a much better use of this development would be to actually use one of the properties as a communal area.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully appreciate what Councillor Steptoe, Councillor McPherson said. Knowing what this property is likely to be used for, I would fully support this application. As far as I'm aware, that the building that is anticipated will not use up any of the land that was going to be used for amenity space. That will still remain, and I will fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask for an officer comment on the viability of sectioning off part of the parking area for a small segregated amenity space? Sorry, we're just...
Sorry, just a slight technical.
Yeah.
So with regards to the actual suggestion with regards to the condition, I do think I have already sort of drafted one that we could use. With members' concerns regarding the lack of amenity space provision, because there is capacity still for a degree of amenity space on the site. If we impose a condition requiring details to be agreed, I can read out the full wording if you want, but it's along those lines. Then we can require them to submit details to us to provide an element of soft landscaping. It would be, sorry, I was going to point at the plan, but I don't have that available to do at the moment, but it would be to the western side of number 12, the main building. As you come in the access way, there's a parcel of land there which we could require as a degree of amenity space provision on the site by condition, and we could agree details of what there was to entail and look like.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm quite happy to put that forward as a condition. Thank you.
Councillor Rafferty.
I'm quite happy to support Councillor Williams on this, and also I can't believe I'm saying this because I'm usually the first one to come up with not enough parking spaces, but for once this is somewhere actually in a town centre with train, bus and loads of places people can go, so I haven't got that concern with parking so much at the moment.
Thank you.
This one.
Members, on 10.1.7 there is the recommendation for approval plus the additional condition as stated. Those members in favour of the approval, please indicate. You can have your name noted as to which way you voted. So this is in favour. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. You okay with that? That item is approved. Members, we have a moment in time where we cannot progress. We'll just hold for a minute. Just in case members weren't aware, and I do apologise if any members of the public have been waiting for this, item 10.3, 1 to 9 Ferry Road, Holmbridge, was withdrawn. than the likelihood is.